The quiet inside Harlem's First National Bank was so deep you could hear a pin drop. Every single person looked toward the front door when Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson walked through those thick glass doors on that hot August afternoon in 1954. The air conditioner was running, but you could feel the stress in the air. This wasn't just any regular bank. This was the bank with a sign that said, "No Colored," in big letters right there in the window. But Bumpy didn't come here to cause trouble. He came to make something important happen. The bank workers stopped moving. People started whispering to each other. The security guards put their hands near their guns. And there he stood, 6 feet tall, calm and sure of himself in a nice gray suit. His hat was tilted just the right way, and he carried a leather bag that held more than just money. It held the power to change everything.
To understand what happened in that bank that day, you need to know what happened 3 months earlier in a quiet bar where Bumpy Johnson learned something that would shake up New York's money world. The Cotton Club was full of the regular crowd that night, politicians, business people, and those who really ran things in the city. Bumpy sat in his usual corner table, watching, listening, and thinking. That's when he heard a talk that would change his life. "The Harlem Community Bank applications keep getting turned down," whispered Councilman Bradley to the man next to him. "Every single one. They say it's about credit scores, but we both know that's not the real reason." Bumpy's ears picked up on this. He'd heard rumors before, but this proved what he thought was true. The banks weren't just saying no to black customers. They were blocking any chance for black people in Harlem to have their own money freedom. The game was fixed from the start. But Bumpy Johnson didn't get where he was by accepting fixed games. He got there by changing the rules. The next morning, he called Marcus Thompson, his money advisor and one of the smartest people he knew. Marcus had finished college at Howard University with a degree in money and business. But in 1954 America, being smart wasn't enough if you were black. "Marcus," Bumpy said, his voice steady like always, "I need you to look into every big bank in Manhattan. Their rules, their government requirements, their weak spots, everything." "What are you planning?" Marcus asked. "Justice, the kind they won't see coming." For weeks, Marcus dug deep into the information. What he found was shocking. Federal banking rules clearly said that any bank getting federal insurance, which was almost every big bank, could not say no to people because of their race. The law was there, written down in black and white, but nobody was making them follow it. Nobody except Bumpy Johnson.
He spent the next month building his case like someone playing chess and thinking many moves ahead. He wrote down every time someone was rejected, every excuse they gave, every act of treating people differently because of skin color. But writing it down wasn't enough. He needed something more powerful. He needed something that would make them listen. That's when he found out about the connection between Harlem's First National Bank and the illegal gambling they were secretly helping downtown. The same bank that said no to black customers was cleaning dirty money for the Italian crime families. The irony was perfect. Armed with this knowledge, Bumpy knew he couldn't just walk in and demand service. He had to be smarter. He had to be someone they couldn't touch. So he came up with a plan that was part business deal, part mind game, and pure genius.
The morning of August 15th, 1954, Bumpy put on his best suit. Not to impress them, but to remind them that respect isn't about the clothes you wear. It's about the power you have and the fear you command. As he got close to those glass doors, he could feel the weight of history on his shoulders. This wasn't just about opening a bank account. This was about opening doors that had been shut tight for generations. He pushed through the entrance, and every conversation stopped. The manager, a thin, pale man named William Morrison, looked up from his desk with the kind of look you give something you don't want to see. But as Bumpy walked up to that manager's desk, bag in hand, he carried something more dangerous than any weapon he'd ever owned. He carried the truth. And the truth had power.
William Morrison looked up from his fancy desk like a man who just found something gross stuck to his shoe. His pale blue eyes looked over Bumpy Johnson with the kind of disgust saved for unwanted bugs. The bank became silent, except for the tick of the big clock and the nervous shuffling of customers pretending not to watch. "I'm sorry," Morrison said, his voice full of fake politeness, "but I think you may have walked into the wrong place." He pointed toward the window, where those 3 words still shined in fresh paint. "No Colored." Bumpy didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He just placed his bag on Morrison's desk with a soft sound that somehow felt heavier than a hammer. "Mr. Morrison," Bumpy said, his voice calm as still water, "I'm here to open an account." Morrison's face turned red. Behind him, 2 security guards moved closer, their hands resting on their guns. The other customers backed away, like they were watching something dangerous happen, which they were. "Sir, this is a respectable place. We don't serve—" Morrison stopped, looking for the right words that wouldn't get him in legal trouble. "Your type." "My type?" Bumpy's eyebrow went up slightly. "And what type would that be, Mr. Morrison?" The manager got more confident. This was his place, his rules, his power. The type that doesn't understand how proper business works. The type that should stick to their own kind of places. A sound of whispers went through the bank. Some customers nodded in agreement. Others looked uncomfortable. But Bumpy Johnson stood there like a stone statue of pure calm. "I see," Bumpy said softly. "So you're telling me that a man who owns 3 legal businesses in Harlem, who pays more in taxes than most of your customers make in a year, who has never been found guilty of a crime," he let that last part hang in the air like smoke, "that man can't open a bank account because of the color of his skin?" Morrison's smile got wider.
That's exactly what I'm telling you. Now, I think you should leave before I have you thrown out.
But here's where Morrison made his first mistake. He thought embarrassing Bumpy would break him. He thought public shame would send him running back to Harlem with his tail between his legs. He had no idea who he was dealing with. Bumpy had survived street wars that would have destroyed weaker men. He'd faced bullets, dealt with betrayal from his closest friends, and built a business empire from nothing. A racist bank manager who thought he was important, that wasn't a threat. That was just an appetizer. "Mr. Morrison," Bumpy said, his voice still deadly calm, "do you know what the word insurance means?" The question caught Morrison off guard. "I beg your pardon?" "Insurance. Protection against loss, against accidents." Bumpy's fingers drummed once on his bag. "Your bank has federal insurance, doesn't it? FDIC protection." Morrison's confidence shook for just a second. "Of course we do. All proper banks do." "Interesting," Bumpy interrupted, "because federal insurance comes with federal rules, federal laws that must be followed." He leaned forward a little. "Laws about treating people differently." The color left Morrison's face, but his arrogance quickly came back. "You can quote all the laws you want. No colored man is getting an account at my bank. Not today, not ever." The second mistake. Morrison wasn't just refusing service. He was making it personal. He was making it about power. About showing everyone in that bank who was in charge. But real power isn't about what you can keep from people. It's about what you can take away from them when they don't expect it. "Your bank," Bumpy repeated slowly, like he was tasting the words. "Interesting choice of words, Mr. Morrison." "That's right. My bank, my rules." Bumpy nodded thoughtfully.
"And these rules of yours, they apply to everyone? Every colored person who walks through that door? Even if that colored person has information about your bank's side businesses?" The question hung in the air like a rope around someone's neck. Morrison's face went from red to white to gray in 3 seconds. "I don't know what you're talking about," Morrison said with a shaky voice. "Of course you don't." Bunky's smile was thin as a razor. "Just like you don't know about the monthly money drops from Carmine Torino's operation. Just like you don't know about the offshore accounts. Just like you don't know that your respectable place has been washing dirty money for the past 18 months. The bank was so quiet you could hear a pin drop in the next building. Morrison's hand started to shake. You're making this up. You have no proof." "Proof?" Bumpy touched his bag. "Mr. Morrison, I don't make up stories. I state facts."
And that's when Morrison made his biggest mistake of all. Instead of backing down, instead of listening to the warning in Bumpy's voice, he decided to double down on his arrogance. "Get out!" Morrison shouted, standing up so fast his chair fell over. "Security, get this man out of here right now." The 2 guards stepped forward, but something in Bumpy's eyes made them stop. It wasn't fear they saw. It wasn't anger. It was something far more dangerous. It was certainty. "Gentlemen," Bumpy said to the guards without looking at them, "I'd think very carefully about your next move." Because they thought they were dealing with just another black man who could be scared, embarrassed, and thrown out. They thought this was about race, about keeping people in their place. They had no idea this was about justice. And justice, when it comes from a man like Bumpy Johnson, doesn't knock politely on your door.
The security guard stopped. Something in Bumpy's stillness told them this wasn't going to end the way Morrison expected. But duty called, and they stepped forward, hands reaching for Bumpy's arms. That's when Bumpy did something that froze everyone in place. He smiled. Not a threatening smile, not an angry smile. The kind of smile someone playing chess gives when their opponent walks into checkmate without knowing it. "Gentlemen," Bumpy said softly, "before you put hands on me, I think you should ask Mr. Morrison about his weekly Thursday meetings with Carmine Torino." Morrison's face went white as fresh snow. "How do you know about the basement office, the offshore transfers, the safety deposit boxes registered under fake names?" Bumpy's voice stayed calm as still water. "Mr. Morrison, I know things that would make your federal insurance investigators very, very interested." The guards looked between Bumpy and Morrison. Uncertainty crept into their eyes. This wasn't going according to the plan. But Morrison wasn't ready to give up, not yet. "You're bluffing. You have nothing." Bumpy reached for his bag. The entire bank held its breath. "Nothing?" He opened the case slowly on purpose. Inside were stacks of papers, photographs, and what looked like accounting pages. "Mr. Morrison, I have 18 months of money records showing strange deposits. I have photographs of you meeting with known criminals. I have papers about offshore accounts that your own board doesn't know about." Morrison's arrogance cracked like thin ice. "You can't, those are private." "Were private," Bumpy corrected. "Amazing what people will tell you when they think you're just another street criminal they can ignore." He pulled out a single photograph and placed it face down on the desk. "But my favorite piece of evidence isn't money records or photographs." "What is it?" Morrison whispered, his voice barely able to be heard. "A recording." The blood drained from Morrison's face completely.
Behind him, customers began to whisper. The security guards stepped back, suddenly wanting nothing to do with whatever was about to happen. "That's impossible," Morrison said with a shaky voice. "There are no recordings." Thursday, July 8, 1954, 3:47 p.m., basement office. Bumpy's voice was precise as a surgeon's knife. "Your exact words were, 'I don't care if it's dirty money as long as it's green money. Those coloreds upstairs will never know what's happening right under their feet.'" Morrison fell into his chair like a deflated balloon. The photograph on his desk seemed to burn through the wood.
"You see, Mr. Morrison," Bumpy continued, his voice getting stronger, "while you were busy embarrassing people who look like me upstairs, you forgot that we exist downstairs too, in kitchens, in cleaning rooms, in places where important men have important talks and never notice the help." The truth hit Morrison like a freight train. The cleaning staff, the maintenance crew, the people he dismissed as invisible had been watching, listening, writing down everything. "What do you want?" Morrison's voice cracked. But here's where Bumpy Johnson showed why he was a legend. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about destroying one racist bank manager. This was about something bigger. "I want justice," Bumpy said simply. "I want what every American citizen deserves, the right to be judged by who they are as a person and the size of their bank account, not the color of their skin." He reached into his bag again and pulled out a cashier's check. The amount was visible to everyone in the bank, $50,000. In 1954, that was more money than most people made in 5 years. "I want to make a deposit," Bumpy said. "A big one. The kind that makes good business sense for any bank that wants to do well." Morrison stared at the check like it might bite him. $50,000 would make his quarterly numbers look great, but accepting it meant... "What if I refuse?" Morrison asked weakly. Bumpy's smile returned, but this time it carried weight. "Then I walk out of here.
Take this information to the federal investigators and let them decide whether your bank's FDIC insurance should be taken away. I let them decide whether criminal charges should be filed. I let them decide whether the newspaper should know about the respectable bank that's been washing mob money while saying no to decorated war veterans.
The trap was perfect. Refuse the deposit and face federal investigation. Accept it and admit that treating people differently was just business, not principle. But Morrison wasn't ready to give up. Not completely. "Even if I wanted to," he said desperately, "the other customers, they won't stand for it. This is 1954. Things don't work that way." Bumpy looked around the bank at the faces staring back at him, some hostile, some curious, some afraid. Then he did something that no one expected. He spoke directly to them. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried to every corner of the bank, "I'm sorry for the interruption, but I need you to understand something. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to do legitimate business with honest money earned through legal businesses, the same as any of you." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Now, Mr. Morrison here seems to think that the color of my skin means I can't have banking privileges. But I wonder how many of you would feel if you found out your bank was secretly doing business with organized crime. How many of you would feel comfortable knowing your deposits were mixed with money from illegal gambling, extortion, and worse?" The whisper that went through the crowd wasn't supportive of Morrison anymore. It was nervous, worried. "Because if I walk out of here without opening an account," Bumpy continued, "those federal investigators I mentioned will be very interested in checking not just the bank's criminal connections, but whether every account, every deposit, every transaction is legitimate." The threat was subtle, but crystal clear. Refuse him service, and everyone's business would be under federal investigation. Morrison realized his customers weren't going to support him anymore. They were going to blame him. But just as victory seemed certain, just as Morrison's resistance was breaking down, something happened that no one saw coming. The bank's main phone rang. Morrison answered it with shaking hands. "First National Bank. Yes, sir. I understand." When he hung up, his face had changed. Not defeated anymore, determined. "That was the bank's president," Morrison said, his voice getting stronger. "He's heard about this situation. He's on his way down here personally." Bumpy's eyes narrowed slightly. This was unexpected. "And he wanted me to tell you," Morrison continued, confidence returning to his voice, "that no amount of threats or evidence will change this bank's policies. We have protection from people much more powerful than you." The game had just changed. Someone had made a phone call, someone with enough power to make Morrison brave again, someone who apparently wasn't afraid of federal investigators, someone who thought they could beat Bumpy Johnson at his own game.
The bank president arrived 30 minutes later like he owned the world. Charles Whitmore III was old money personified. Silver hair, perfectly pressed suit, and the kind of confidence that comes from generations of inherited power. He walked through that bank like a king looking over his kingdom. But when he saw Bumpy Johnson standing there, calm as Sunday morning, something flickered behind his eyes. Not fear, recognition. "Mr. Johnson," Whitmore civet, holding out his hand like they were old friends. What an unexpected pleasure. Morrison's jaw dropped. The customers exchanged confused looks. The security guards looked like they'd swallowed their tongues. But Bumpy didn't shake the offered hand. He studied Whitmore's face like he was reading a map of every dirty secret the man had ever buried. "Mr. Whitmore," Bumpy said quietly, "still taking your Thursday afternoon meetings in the basement?" The color left Whitmore's face faster than water down a drain. Because this wasn't just about Morrison anymore. This went all the way to the top. "I think," Whitmore said carefully, "we should discuss this matter privately." "No," Bumpy's voice cut through the air like a blade. "We discuss it here, in front of everyone, because secrets have a way of growing in the dark." Whitmore looked around the bank at all the watching faces, all the listening ears. His fake smile never changed, but sweat began to form on his forehead. "Mr. Johnson, I'm sure we can reach some kind of understanding." "Understanding?" Bumpy reached into his bag one more time. What he pulled out made Whitmore step backward like he'd been slapped.
A tape recorder. Small, silver, and still running. "This entire conversation has been recorded," Bumpy announced to the bank. "Every word, every threat,
every admission. Morrison fell into his chair. Whitmore's calm broke like thin ice. That's illegal, Whitmore said with a shaky voice. You can't record people without their permission. In a public place of business? Bumpy's eyebrow went up. When federal crimes are being discussed? Mr. Whitmore, I think you'll find that federal investigators are very interested in recordings that prove criminal conspiracies. But here's where the real genius of Bumpy Johnson showed itself. Because he hadn't just been recording this conversation, he'd been recording for months. You see, gentlemen, Bumpy said, his voice carried to every corner of the bank. While you've been busy saying no to honest citizens, I've been writing down your real business, the money laundering, the offshore accounts, the protection payments to organized crime families. He reached into his bag again and pulled out a stack of photographs. Bank officials shaking hands with known criminals, suitcases full of cash being loaded into private cars, meetings in dark alleys that no legitimate banker should ever attend. But my personal favorite, Bumpy continued, placing a single photograph on Morrison's desk, is this one from last Tuesday night. Mr. Whitmore, would you like to explain to your customers why you were having dinner with 3 members of the Torino family? Whitmore's face went from pale to gray to green. The photograph showed him laughing at a table with men whose faces had been on FBI wanted posters for years.
This is blackmail, Whitmore whispered. No, Bumpy corrected. This is justice. Blackmail is when you demand money to keep quiet. I'm not asking for money. I'm asking for what every American citizen deserves, equal treatment under the law. The trap was perfect, beautiful, devastating. Because Bumpy hadn't just gathered evidence, he'd created a situation where saying no to him meant admitting to federal crimes in front of witnesses, where treating him differently meant confessing to money laundering, organized crime connections, and conspiracy. The choice is simple, Bumpy said. Accept my deposit, treat me with the same respect you show any other customer, and your secrets stay between us. Or refuse me service and watch federal investigators shut down your bank while your customers learn exactly what kind of place they've been trusting with their money. Morrison looked at Whitmore. Whitmore looked at the photographs. The customers looked at each other with growing alarm. That's when Whitmore made his final desperate play. Even if we wanted to help you, he said, voice shaking, we can't. The other banks, they have agreements, gentlemen's agreements. If we break ranks, if we serve people like you, they'll destroy us. It was the last card he had to play. The admission that treating people differently wasn't just policy, it was conspiracy, a coordinated effort by all the major banks to keep things separated. But Bumpy Johnson had been waiting for exactly this moment.
Other banks? He smiled that dangerous smile. Mr. Whitmore, you seem to be under the impression that I'm asking for a favor. Let me make something clear for you. He reached into his bag one final time and pulled out a document that made both men go completely silent. A federal banking license application. Approved. Stamped. Official. Gentlemen, meet the newest board member of Harlem Community Trust, a federally chartered bank that will be opening next month with full FDIC insurance. A bank that will gladly serve every customer your place refuses. The room erupted in whispers. Morrison's hands started shaking. Whitmore looked like he'd been hit by lightning. You see, Bumpy continued, while you've been playing your little games of keeping people out, I've been building something better, something legitimate, something that will give every person you've rejected a place to do business. The masterstroke was revealed. This had never been about forcing one racist bank to serve him. This had been about writing down their refusal, their corruption, their conspiracy, evidence that would guarantee his own bank's success while destroying theirs. So here's what's going to happen, Bumpy said, his voice calm as death. You're going to accept my deposit with a smile. You're going to treat me with respect. And you're going to know that every customer you lose to prejudice will find a new home at a bank that judges people by their character, not their color. Morrison reached for the deposit slip with shaking hands. Whitmore stood frozen like a statue. But just as victory seemed complete, just as justice seemed served, the bank's door opened one more time. 3 men in federal badges walked in. FBI. and they weren't there to arrest Bumpy Johnson.
The 3 FBI agents walked through that bank like they owned every inch of marble floor. Special Agent Robert Hayes led the group, a man who looked like he'd been carved from stone and disappointment. Behind him, 2 younger agents with bags and the kind of looks that meant somebody's world was about to end. But they weren't looking at Bumpy Johnson. They were looking directly at Charles Whitmore III and William Morrison. "Mr. Whitmore," Agent Hayes said, his voice carrying the weight of federal authority, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit money laundering, organized crime connections, and breaking federal banking rules." The bank erupted in chaos. Customers gasped. Bank workers whispered frantically. Morrison's face went from pale to completely bloodless. But Bumpy Johnson? He stood there calm as a lake at midnight, watching justice unfold exactly as he'd planned it. "This is outrageous," Whitmore sputtered, his refined calm cracking like cheap paint. "You can't just storm in here and—" "Sir," Agent Hayes interrupted, "we have recordings of your conversations with members of organized crime families. We have photographs of illegal transactions. We have 18 months of written evidence showing you've been breaking federal banking laws." Hayes turned to address the entire bank. "This place has been under federal investigation for money laundering and organized crime connections. As of this moment, all accounts are frozen while we do a complete check." The customers erupted in panic. Their money, their savings, everything was suddenly trapped in a criminal business they never knew they were part of. Morrison tried to run. He actually bolted for the back exit, like a rabbit running from a wolf. But the second FBI agent was already there, handcuffs ready. "Mr. Morrison," the agent said almost politely, "you're also under arrest."
That's when Whitmore made his final desperate play. He pointed directly at Bumpy Johnson. "Wait!" Whitmore shouted. "If you want real criminals, there's your man, Ellsworth Johnson. Everyone knows he runs illegal operations in Harlem." The entire bank turned to look at Bumpy. Here was the moment of truth, the moment when his past could destroy everything he'd built. But Agent Hayes did something that stunned everyone in that bank. He smiled. "Mr. Johnson," Hayes said respectfully, "thank you for your help in this investigation. Your information was invaluable in building our case." The truth hit the bank like a lightning bolt. Bumpy hadn't just been gathering evidence for leverage. He'd been working with the FBI all along. "You see, ladies and gentlemen," Bumpy said, finally speaking to the crowd, "when you discover federal crimes, you have 2 choices. You can use that information for personal gain, or you can do what's right for your country." He reached into his bag and pulled out an official FBI consultant badge. The room went silent. Not the nervous silence of before, but the stunned silence of people realizing they'd completely misunderstood everything they'd witnessed. "For 6 months," Bumpy continued, "I've been writing down the criminal activities of this place. Not for blackmail, not for personal revenge, but because when banks break federal law, when they treat people differently and wash dirty money, they hurt entire communities." Whitmore's face twisted with rage and disbelief. You planned this whole thing?" "I planned justice," Bumpy corrected. "I planned to give every person you've rejected, every customer you've lied to, every community you've stolen from, the truth they deserve."
The genius was breathtaking. The treating people differently, the embarrassment, the threats, all of it had been theater, designed to get them to confess their crimes in front of witnesses and recording devices. "Your bank," Bumpy said to the terrified customers, "has been stealing from you for years, mixing your honest money with criminal money, using your deposits to fund illegal operations, all while saying no to law-abiding citizens based on skin color." Agent Hayes stepped forward with the formal charges. "Mr. Whitmore, you're charged with money laundering, conspiracy to commit organized crime connections, breaking federal banking rules, and civil rights violations. Mr. Morrison, you face the same charges, plus blocking justice." As the handcuffs clicked into place, Whitmore turned to Bumpy with pure hatred in his eyes. "You think you've won? You think this changes anything? There are dozens of banks just like this one, dozens of men just like me. You can't fight them all." Bumpy's response was calm, measured, and absolutely devastating. "I don't need to fight them all," he said. "I just need to show them what happens to men who confuse prejudice with power." The FBI began taking Whitmore and Morrison toward the door, but as they passed Bumpy, Whitmore hissed one final threat. "This won't end here, Johnson. People like you don't get to win against people like us. Not in 1954. Not ever."
Bumpy looked him dead in the eye. "Mr. Whitmore, people like me have been winning against people like you for centuries. We just never had the paperwork to prove it before."
As the arrested men were led away, Agent Hayes turned back to address the bank. "This place will remain closed while we investigate. All customers will have their accounts moved to legitimate banks of their choosing. Any money connected to criminal activity will be taken by the government." He paused, looking around the room. "However, I'm pleased to announce that Harlem Community Trust, a new federally chartered bank, will be opening next week to serve any customers who need immediate banking services." The crowd whispered in amazement. The man they'd watched being treated differently, embarrassed and threatened, was now offering to help them. "Mr. Johnson," Agent Hayes said formally, "on behalf of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, thank you for your service to justice." But Bumpy raised his hand to stop the praise. "Agent Hayes, I didn't do this for recognition. I did it because every American citizen deserves the same rights, the same respect, the same opportunities, regardless of the color of their skin." He turned to face the customers who had watched his embarrassment just hours before. Some looked ashamed, others looked amazed. All of them looked like they were seeing him for the first time. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bumpy said, his voice carrying to every corner of the bank, "I hope what you witnessed today teaches you something important. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about making sure the next person doesn't have to face what you faced." As the FBI finished their work, as the customers slowly left, as the greatest banking scandal in New York history began to make headlines, one question remained. What happened next would be talked about in Harlem for generations.
As the FBI agents finished their work and the last of the stunned customers left the disgraced bank, Bumpy Johnson stood alone in that marble temple of corruption. The afternoon sun came through the windows, lighting up the scene of his greatest victory. But this wasn't the end of the story. This was the beginning of a legend. Agent Hayes came up to Bumpy one final time before leaving. "Mr. Johnson, I have to ask, how did you know? How did you piece together an operation that complicated?" Bumpy's answer revealed the true genius of his plan. "Agent Hayes, when you grow up in the streets, you learn to read people. You learn to see what they're really doing versus what they claim to be doing. These bankers thought they were untouchable because they wore suits instead of street clothes. But crime is crime, whether it happens in an alley or a boardroom." He pointed around the empty bank. "The difference is, street criminals are honest about what they are. These men hid behind respectability while stealing from entire communities. That made them more dangerous than any gangster I've ever faced." Within hours, the story exploded across every newspaper in New York. Harlem's Bumpy Johnson exposes banking conspiracy. FBI arrests bank officials in money laundering scheme. The man who brought down Manhattan's most corrupt bank. But the real story wasn't in the headlines. It was in the streets. Word spread through Harlem like wildfire. The man they'd known as a numbers runner, a street operator, someone who worked in the shadows, he'd taken down the entire financial establishment that had kept them locked out for decades. The Harlem Community Trust opened the following Monday to lines that stretched around 3 city blocks. Every person who'd been rejected, embarrassed, or treated differently by the major banks came to do business with the place Bumpy had built. But here's what made it legendary. Bumpy didn't just open a bank for black customers. He opened it for everyone who'd been rejected by the system. Poor immigrants, small business owners, working families, anyone who'd been told they weren't respectable enough for traditional banking.
On opening day, the first customer in line was Mrs. Eleanor Washington, an elderly woman who'd been turned away from 7 different banks when she tried to deposit her late husband's pension. Behind her stood Marco Antonelli, an Italian immigrant whose accent had cost him banking privileges at 3 places. Next was Sarah Cohen, a Jewish seamstress whose small business applications had been mysteriously lost at every major bank in the city. The line represented something more powerful than money. It represented justice. But the old power structure wasn't going down without a fight. 3 weeks after Whitmore's arrest, Bumpy received a visit at his new bank. 5 men in expensive suits who represented the remaining major banks in Manhattan. They came with an offer that would have made most men rich beyond imagination. "Mr. Johnson," their spokesman said, "we're prepared to offer you $10 million to close this place. Cash, no questions asked. You walk away wealthy, and we all forget this unfortunate incident."
Bumpy listened to their offer in complete silence. Then he stood up, walked to his office window, and looked out at the line of customers still waiting to do business with a bank that treated them with dignity. "Gentlemen," he said without turning around, "you're looking at this all wrong. You think this is about money. You think this is about competition. You think this is about business." He turned to face them, and in his eyes they saw something that made them understand why this man had survived and thrived in the most dangerous streets in America. "This is about respect. This is about justice. This is about making sure my community never has to bow down to your kind of power again." The offer was refused. The men left, and within 6 months, 3 more major Manhattan banks were under federal investigation for treating people differently.
The legend of that day spread far beyond New York. Banks across the country began changing their policies, terrified that they might face their own Bumpy Johnson, someone smart enough, patient enough, and brave enough to expose their corruption to federal authorities. But the real measure of Bumpy's victory wasn't in the places he brought down. It was in the lives he lifted up. By 1955, Harlem Community Trust was giving money to Black-owned businesses, providing home loans to families who'd been turned down by other banks, and offering financial services that treated every customer with equal respect, regardless of their background. The bank became a symbol that spread across America. In Chicago, Detroit, Los Angeles, wherever communities had been locked out of the financial system, they pointed to Harlem and said, "If Bumpy Johnson can do it there, we can do it here." Years later, when civil rights leaders needed examples of economic justice, they studied what happened in that Manhattan bank on August 15, 1954. They learned that sometimes the most powerful weapon against unfair systems isn't a march or a protest. It's a man with a bag full of evidence and the courage to use it.
William Morrison served 18 months in federal prison. Charles Whitmore III got 5 years and lost his family's banking empire. Their bank was shut down, and every customer who'd lost money because of their criminal activities got paid back by federal insurance. But here's the part of the story that makes it legendary. Bumpy Johnson never celebrated or showed off about their downfall. When reporters asked him how it felt to destroy such powerful enemies, his answer became famous across America. "I didn't destroy them," he said simply. "They destroyed themselves. I just held up a mirror so everyone could see what they really were."
That's what made Bumpy Johnson more than just a street legend. That's what made him a man who changed history. Because when you stand up to power with truth instead of violence, when you fight unfairness with intelligence instead of anger, when you build something better instead of just tearing something down, that's when you become untouchable. That's when you become legendary. And that's why 70 years later, people still tell the story of the day Bumpy Johnson walked into a no-colored bank and walked out having changed American banking forever.